All right, let's dive into something a little different this time.
Oh.
Yeah, a real-life mystery that almost feels, I don't know, ripped from the headlines.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's the unsolved murder of Jill Dando,
Jill Dando, the BBC presenter.
the one and only.
Wow, that's a case that really captured the public's attention.
It did. I mean, think about it. A woman known for, well, a show about solving crimes becomes the victim of an unsolved crime.
Yeah, there's a certain irony to that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And it's not just the irony, it's all the twists and turns, the theories, the fact that it just gripped the nation for years.
Right, and she wasn't just some, face on the screen.
No, definitely not.
She had this way of connecting with people, explaining things, clearly, but with real compassion.
People trusted her, it felt like.
They felt like they knew her.
Yeah, exactly.
So where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, I think we need to start by really understanding Jill Dando, the person, not just the presenter.
Okay, makes sense.
She wasn't an overnight success story.
No, not at all.
Worked her way up. Started at a local paper, the Weston and Somerset Mercury.
Starting from the ground up.
Then BBC Radio Devon, then BBC Southwest. A real journey.
It's clear she had that drive, that passion for journalism.
And talent, you can't forget the talent.
Oh, absolutely.
And that eventually led her to the national stage.
The BBC News at 6, Crime Watch, she became a household name.
But it was more than just her, professional success.
Oh, for sure.
Viewers saw her as genuine, approachable, someone you'd want to have a cup of tea with.
That warmth, that genuine connection, it resonated with people.
It really did. And tragically, it was all cut short on April 26, 1999.
A day that I think many people remember vividly.
Finding her on her doorstep in Fulham.
In broad daylight.
It was brutal, shocking, and the motive completely unclear.
It sent shockwaves through the nation, the fact that it could happen to someone like Jill Dando.
It felt like nowhere was safe.
And then came the arrest of Barry George.
Right, a local man with a history of mental health issues.
It seemed like, okay, maybe there's some closure here.
Like the puzzle was solved.
But then the doubts started to creep in.
The evidence, a lot of it was circumstantial.
Eyewitness accounts, questions about the forensic evidence. It wasn't as clear-cut as it initially seemed.
And those doubts ultimately led to Barry George's acquittal in 2008.
Which just threw the whole investigation wide open again.
Back to square one.
With the same haunting questions. Who and why?
The acquittal, it wasn't just a legal victory for Barry George, it was almost like...
Like admitting that even the justice system can get it wrong.
Exactly. Adding another layer of complexity to an already baffling case.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. With Barry George acquitted, investigators had to revisit every angle, every possible motive. And that's what we'll delve into next.
I'm ready. Lead the way.
It's like you think you've got a handle on things, and then boom, the rug's pulled out from under you.
Yeah, talk about a case that keeps you guessing.
So, with Barry George acquitted, where did investigators even begin?
They had to go back to basics, re-examine every lead, every possible motive.
And that's where some of the more, I guess you could say, out there theories started to emerge.
Oh, absolutely. This case is a breeding ground for theories.
Like the Yugoslav connection. That always sounded a bit like something out of a spy novel to me.
It does have that sort of international intrigue feel to it.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar, what is the Yugoslav connection?
Okay, so rewind a bit. Before Jill's murder, NATO was conducting airstrikes in Serbia during the Kosovo War.
Right, I remember that.
And Jill, being a journalist, reported on the conflict and even made a pretty powerful appeal for Kosovar Albanian refugees on TV.
Okay, so the theory is that someone connected to the Serbian government, maybe even the military, targeted her as revenge.
Exactly. Some even pointed to a specific individual. Jelko Rajnatovic, better known as Arkan.
Arkan, the paramilitary leader.
The one and only, a pretty ruthless figure.
Known for silencing his critics, shall we say.
To put it mildly, and there were claims, unproven of course, that he ordered a hit on Jill.
Wow. I can see why that theory gained traction. It's got all the elements of a thriller.
It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
But was there any actual evidence to support it?
That's the thing. Evidence is the key. And in this case, concrete evidence linking Arkan or the Serbian government to the crime is pretty thin on the ground.
I imagine investigators must have looked into this pretty thoroughly, though.
Well, they did. Intelligence agencies were involved, witnesses interviewed, connections scrutinized, but nothing definitive came up.
So the Yugoslav connection, a fascinating theory, but ultimately...
unproven, at least for now.
Okay, so if we set that aside for the moment, What other motives were investigators considering?
Well, remember, Jill was a public figure constantly in the spotlight.
Right, fame comes with its own set of risks.
Exactly. And that led them to look into the possibility of stalkers.
A chilling thought, especially given what happened.
It happens more often than you'd think, unfortunately.
I mean, there were reports of nuisance calls, people acting suspiciously around her home.
But despite all that, no credible stalker threat was ever identified.
It's a reminder that even someone like Jill Dando, with all her success, could be vulnerable.
Fame doesn't make you immune to danger.
Did they explore any other avenues?
They did. They considered professional rivalry.
The world of television can be pretty cutthroat.
It can. And Jill was at the top of her game, so there might have been people who envied her success.
Jealousy, ambition, those are powerful motivators.
They really are. But again, no concrete evidence to support that theory either.
So many dead ends.
It's frustrating, isn't it?
It is. It's like you're almost willing to accept any explanation at this point.
Just to have some sense of closure.
But the truth is, we still don't know why Jill Dando was murdered.
No, we don't. And that's what makes this case so enduring, so captivating, and ultimately so tragic.
It's almost like we've been on this long, winding road, and we're still no closer to the destination.
A road with a lot of forks in it, too, leading to different possible destinations, but none of them quite feel right.
And with each path we explored, with each theory we examined, the truth seems to slip further away.
I know what you mean. It's like chasing a shadow. It's always just out of reach.
So maybe instead of focusing on the destination, the answer, we should think about the journey itself.
Okay, what do you mean?
We started by remembering Jill Dando, the person, the journalist, the woman who brought warmth and understanding to our screens.
Someone who, let's be honest, we all felt like we knew.
Exactly. And then we were confronted with the brutality of her murder, the shock, the confusion.
And the initial sense of relief when Barry George was arrested, followed by the crushing blow of his acquittal.
Yeah, that's when the real mystery started to take hold.
Because suddenly the neat and tidy narrative was gone.
And we were left with this gaping hole, this void of unanswered questions.
Which led us down so many different paths. The Yugoslav connection, stalkers, professional rivalry, even mistaken identity.
Each plausible in its own way, each offering a glimpse into a different world of motives and possibilities.
But none providing that definitive answer, that satisfying click that tells you you've solved the puzzle.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe there is no neat and tidy answer.
Maybe the truth is messy, complicated, and ultimately unknowable.
But even though we may never know for certain who killed Jill Dando and why, the journey itself, the exploration of all these possibilities has been, well...
Illuminating.
Illuminating, yeah, and maybe even a little bit humbling.
Humbling in what sense?
Because it reminds us that we don't always have all the answers, that sometimes the mysteries endure.
And that's okay, isn't it?
I think so. Because those enduring mysteries, they keep us curious, they keep us searching, and they remind us that the world is a much more complex and fascinating place than we sometimes give it credit for.
And they remind us that sometimes the most important thing isn't finding the answer, but asking the right questions.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the Jill Dando case, the one question that lingers for me is this. What do you think happened?
That's a question that each of our listeners will have to answer for themselves based on what we've discussed, and maybe that's the most fitting ending to this story.
An ending that's not really an ending, but rather an invitation to keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep searching for the truth, even if it's always just out of reach.